A Roman legionary steps out of formation, gleaming helmet, red cloak, short sword at his side. And then, these, leather strips hanging from his belt like fringe on a curtain. Today it looks odd, but 2,000 years ago, barbarians saw those strips and ran. Why did the most fearsome army of the ancient world wear what looks like a skirt to modernize? Why did the Romans, who conquered half the world, choose this exact design? You're about to learn why these leather strips were a stroke of genius, and why without them, a legionary would have been a dead man. Let's start with the main point. This isn't a skirt at all. The Greeks called this thing pterygus, which translates as wings or feathers. The Romans were more practical. For them, it was simply leather strips, no romantic names. Where did the idea come from? Greek hoplites wore these as early as the 5th century BC, those same men who held the line at Thermopylae. The Romans saw it, appreciated the practicality, and adopted the technology. But they didn't just copy it, they improved it. A legionary wore 2 sets of strips. The first attached to the shoulders and protected the arms down to the elbows. The second hung from the belt and covered the thighs, groin, and upper legs. Each strip was thick tanned leather, sometimes with metal plates at the ends. Not decoration, structural reinforcement. Picture a leatherworker's shop in Rome. On the table lie raw materials, long strips of bull hide, soaked in oil for suppleness. The craftsman cuts them into palm-width bands, attaches them to a leather belt with copper rivets. On the ends of some strips, he hammers bronze fittings. They add weight, keep the strips from riding up when walking. One set for a legionary takes 3 to 4 hours of work from an experienced craftsman. Sounds primitive? This design served Rome for 8 centuries, from the Republican Wars with Carthage to the late Empire, when legions held the frontier on the Rhine and Danube. Hit the like button and subscribe. We're about to break down why these strips were more genius than any metal armor. The Battle of Cannae, 216 BC. 50,000 Romans surrounded by Carthaginians. Warriors standing in tight formation, shoulder to shoulder. The enemy strikes with swords from below, aiming for the groin, thighs, upper legs. Those zones not covered by the shield. The legionaries survive. The leather strips deflect blows, disrupt the trajectory of blades. They didn't provide absolute protection, but often the strips turned the serious wound into a scratch. First function: protection without weight. The strips covered the most vulnerable areas. The groin. One hit there and a fighter is out of action. The femoral artery. Sever that and a man has 1 minute until death from blood loss. Upper legs. A strike there removes mobility. All these zones were covered by leather bands. But the key factor was weight. A full set of belt strips weighed 500 to 700 grams. Compare that to metal leg protection, greaves, or a mail skirt. Those weighed 2 to 3 kilograms. A legionary carried 20 kilograms of equipment: helmet, chainmail or plate armor, shield, sword, 2 javelins, 3 days' rations. Every saved kilogram meant survival. Second function: freedom of movement. The strips weren't connected to each other. Each band attached separately to the belt and moved independently. A legionary could run, jump across ditches, mount a horse, climb a siege ladder. Try doing that in a solid metal skirt. It clamps your legs like a vice. Look at modern reenactors. Those who've worn accurate copies of Roman equipment confirm. In pterygus, you can march and fight for hours. Solid leg armor turns a fighter into a turtle. Fast, maybe, but still slower than an opponent without armor. Roman tactics were built on maneuverability. Legions didn't stand still, they moved. Reformed, flanked, pursued retreating enemies. Leather strips allowed this. Heavy leg armor didn't. Third function: ventilation. A legion lands in Egypt, summer, 100 degrees in the shade. Legionaries march 30 kilometers through the desert. Each man wears a metal breastplate with a tunic underneath. Sweat flows in streams. But the thighs and legs are open. The strips allow airflow. This prevents heat stroke. Imagine the alternative: solid metal greaves or a mail skirt. Metal heats in the sun to temperatures where you can't touch it. Mail doesn't breathe at all. A legionary in that equipment would reach the battlefield half dead. Romans fought everywhere. In Spain, Africa, Syria, Mesopotamia. Heat was routine there. Tarujas allowed soldiers to maintain combat effectiveness in conditions where other armies physically couldn't fight. Gallic and Germanic tribes wore pants and heavy armor. Romans laughed. Barbarians don't understand that in battle, overheating kills faster than an enemy sword. A legion could force march 50 kilometers, arrive at the battlefield, and immediately engage. An opponent in heavy armor would be exhausted by then. 3 simple functions: protection, mobility, comfort. No other design gave this balance. That's exactly why tarujas were worn for 8 centuries straight. 4th century BC, early Roman Republic. A legionary puts on equipment before a campaign against the Samnites. His peruges look simple: 12 leather strips of equal length hanging from the belt to mid-thigh. No decoration, no metal, pure function. A craftsman cut them from bull hide, soaked them in oil for softness, nailed them to the belt with iron rivets. 2 hours of work. This was a utilitarian item. The army of the Republic consisted of citizen militia. Everyone bought their own equipment. The simpler the design, the cheaper. Leather strips cost a few denarii, affordable even for a poor farmer. Most importantly, they worked. Jump forward 400 years. 1st century AD, the height of empire. A legionary in Trajan's time wears completely different peruges. The strips are now varied lengths, outer ones shorter, inner ones longer. This creates layering, strengthens protection. At the end of each strip, bronze or copper fittings. They add weight, prevent strips from riding up during movement. But the main thing is sound. When a legion marches in formation, thousands of metal fittings chime in rhythm with footsteps. This is psychological warfare. The enemy hears this ringing from far away and understands. Romans are coming, professionals who conquered half the world. On some strips appears decoration, embossed patterns, medallions depicting an eagle or she-wolf. This is no longer just protection, it's a symbol of belonging to a legion. Each unit had its own distinctive elements. A centurion could tell by the appearance of peruges which cohort a fighter came from. Making such a set took a full working day. The workshop at a legion camp produced them by the dozens. A leather worker took tanned hide, marked strips of different lengths, cut them, finished the edges, attached metal fittings, applied embossing. One legion of 6,000 men required 6,000 sets, plus replacements. Leather wore out, tore in battles. This was an industry. The Roman army became professional. The state equipped soldiers. They could afford complexity and quality. Pteryges transformed from simple protection into an element of military culture. But nothing lasts forever. 3rd to 4th century AD, late empire. The treasury is empty, borders crack under barbarian pressure, the army needs mass reinforcement. Pteryges simplify again. Metal fittings disappear, decoration vanishes, layering owes. Strips become uniform length, like in the old days of the Republic. Moreover, leather strips are often replaced with mail skirts. This is cheaper in mass production. A blacksmith can make a mail skirt faster than a leather worker can cut and finish 12 strips. True, mail is heavier by 1.5 kilograms and ventilates worse, but there's no choice. Tens of thousands of recruits need equipping. Archaeologists find confirmation of this evolution. Excavations at Pompeii, the city that died in 79 AD at the empire's peak, yield finds of pteryges with metal fittings and decoration. Excavations of 4th century frontier forts show simple leather strips or mail replacements. The history of pteryges is the history of Rome itself, from the simplicity of the early republic through the luxury of empire to the forced economy of later centuries. But the essence remained unchanged: protection that doesn't hinder movement. Now the main question: why does a modern person see these strips and think of a skirt? Why does what terrified barbarians seem ridiculous today? A modern man looks at a Roman legionary and sees a skirt. For a Roman, this would be absurd, like calling a tank a child's toy. Tarujas were a symbol of war, blood, and conquest. Those same strips that seem strange today were worn by men who subjugated 3 continents. For a Roman, masculinity was defined not by clothing, but by deeds. Virtus, the Roman concept of valor, meant military courage, physical strength, readiness to die for the Republic. A legionary in Tarujas embodied all of this. He'd served 20 years, participated in dozens of battles, received wounds and decorations. His leather strips were worn from campaigns stretching from Britain to Mesopotamia. Funny? Try saying that to his face. A legionary is trained to kill with bare hands. He can march 30 kilometers with 20 kilograms of gear and immediately enter combat. He knows 20 ways to breach enemy defenses and 3 ways to build a bridge overnight. The tarujas on him are work clothes for a professional killer. Now look at those the Romans mocked. Gauls and Germans wore pants, trousers of rough wool or leather. For a Roman, this was a mark of barbarism. A civilized man wears a toga or tunic. Pants are clothing for savages who don't know what baths and roads are. The Roman writer Tacitus described Germans with contempt. They wear fur pants and live in filthy huts. For a Roman, a German in pants looked as ridiculous as a legionary in tarujas does to a modern person. The difference is cultural context. Interesting point. When, in the late Empire, Romans began hiring barbarians into the army, they gradually adopted pants. By the 4th century, even Roman legionaries in northern provinces wore trousers under their tarujas. Practicality defeated prejudice. In the cold climate of Germania and Britain, pants protected against frostbite better than bare legs. But tarujas didn't disappear. They remained a symbol of the Roman legionary, even when pants appeared underneath. This speaks to the power of tradition. The strips were worn for 800 years. They became part of identity. Remember other examples of skirts worn by warriors. Scottish Highlanders in kilts. Try telling a Scotsman that a kilt is women's clothing. At best, he'll explain the history of Clan Tartans and the Battle of Culloden. At worst, he'll show you what hangs under the kilt besides fabric. Greek hoplites at Marathon and Thermopylae wore perujas very similar to Roman ones. Those 300 Spartans who held the line against the Persian army all wore leather strips. Nobody calls them feminine. They stopped the greatest empire of their time. Or samurai in Japan. Their armor included kusazuri, plates protecting the thighs, very similar to perujas in function. Hanging strips of metal or leather that provided protection and mobility. Samurai were the elite of Japanese society, the embodiment of masculinity and warrior honor. The pattern is obvious. Different cultures independently arrived at the same solution. Protecting thighs and groin with strips of material is more effective than solid armor. This is an engineering optimum, not a fashion choice. Modern reenactors who recreate Roman weapons and combat techniques are unanimous. Perujas are comfortable and practical. They don't restrict movement, don't overheat, provide basic protection. One reenactor said, "The first 5 minutes you feel strange. Then you forget about them completely, and after an hour you understand why Romans wore this for 800 years." The question of perception is a question of context. In ancient Rome, a man in perujas was a warrior. In the modern world, those same strips are associated with women's clothing. But clothing doesn't define essence. A legionary in perujas conquered the world. That's the only thing that matters. Romans understood a simple thing. Functionality matters more than appearance. Did perujas work? Yes. Did they help win battles? Yes. Then what difference does it make how they look? The winner dictates fashion, not the other way around. 5th century BC. A Greek hoplite puts on leather strips before the Battle of Marathon. 13th century AD, the last Byzantine soldiers wear a similar design defending Constantinople. Between these events, 18 centuries. Tarujas outlived the Republic, the Empire, the Byzantine millennium. Few military technologies can boast such longevity. Romans didn't invent tarujas. They took a ready-made idea from the Greeks, but they did the main thing, perfected it. Selected optimal leather thickness, ideal strip length, correct number of layers. tested it in hundreds of battles across 3 continents, adapted it to different climates, from African heat to British rain. The result? Perfect balance of 3 parameters: protection of vital zones without critical weight increase, complete freedom of movement without loss of defense, comfort in any climatic conditions without risk of overheating. No other design gave this combination. That's exactly why Tarujas became the standard for 8 centuries. Legions conquered territory from Scotland to the Sahara, from the Atlantic to the Euphrates. 3 million square kilometers under Roman control, and on every legionary in these conquests were leather strips. Coincidence? No. Every element of Roman equipment passed natural selection in combat conditions. What worked, stayed. What didn't work, disappeared. Tarujas worked. A centurion could spend 40 years in the legion and replace 10 sets of strips, but the concept remained the same, because it was correct. Modern military logic is built on the same principles. Every gram of equipment must be justified. A soldier carries weapons, armor, ammunition, water, rations, communications equipment. Weight is critical. Every extra kilogram reduces mobility and endurance. Military engineers spend decades lightening gear without losing protection. Romans solved this problem 2,000 years ago. Tarujas weighed half a kilogram and protected the thighs. Metal greaves weighed 3 kilos and did the same thing. The choice is obvious. A legionary with Tarujas could march 10 kilometers farther, fight half an hour longer, carry more equipment. In the marathon of war, these advantages added up to victory. Functionality defeats prejudice, always. Romans didn't ask how Tarujas looked, they asked, do they work? The answer was positive for 800 years straight. Next time you see a Roman legionary in a film or picture, look at those leather strips differently. This isn't a strange skirt. This is the result of centuries of military engineering, tested in thousands of battles. This is one of the reasons why a small city on the Tiber became the greatest empire of antiquity. Behind every detail of Roman equipment stands the practical experience of generations. Tarujas are just one example, but it shows how Romans thought. Not how does this look, but how does this work? This approach created an empire that lasted 1,000 years. If you found this video interesting, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Click the bell so you don't miss new breakdowns of how ancient technologies actually worked. Write in the comments what element of Roman equipment would you like us to analyze next. See you in future episodes.